Hi again, everyone. I'm Adam Kassab from GLOBIS, and welcome to Inside Japan. Today, delighted to be here with Cathy Loose, who is the Director of Benefits for Asia Pacific and also the Global Mobility Practice Leader at Towers Watson here in Tokyo. Cathy, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. Can we just start off then, Cathy? Can you just tell us a bit about your background?
Sure,
Yeah.
happy to. I actually was born in Vietnam, originally from Vietnam, but have been living in the U.S. for a long time and educated in the U.S., Europe. I'm now, have lived overseas for more than 20 years.
Wow.
And a lot of that has to do, I'm what you call the perfect example of a trailing spouse. Fortunately, because of my background, starting out in international banking and finance, and then transition over to HR, both from a corporate and consulting, I have had a lot of good opportunities, basically to follow my husband, but continue to work in a kind of professional environment.
Fantastic. And the transition from banking to HR, can you just mention how did that happen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I started out, had an MBA in international banking and finance, and then it was and working in a number of large bank in the U.S. And at that time also, it was a time where there's a Latin American bad debt situation with Argentina, and one of the corporate client basically just happened to invite me to join the company because when they talk about HR at that point, it was a change moving away from just not only the focus on the soft personnel issue, but more cost driven because of high healthcare costs, pension retirement compensation issue. So they wanted to bring a kind of more financial perspective into the HR focus. And that's how I started and switching from banking and finance and into the HR.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And at the moment, your position here, Director of Benefits and for Asia Pacific and Global Mobility Practices, can you tell our viewers a bit more about what you're actually doing now?
Sure. Within our organization, benefits is kind of a large umbrella. Underneath that, we cover a number of services that we offer to our clients, ranging from merger acquisition to, in terms of retirement benefits, healthcare, but also we address issues like talent mobility under our, organization. And we also have an international consulting group fall under the benefits as well. So in my role is essentially to help develop our business, looking at from an Asia Pacific, addressing a lot of these non-retirement issues, but also in terms of addressing the talent mobility practice for the Asia Pacific. This is one of the fastest growth area in terms of looking at talent management and how to integrate talent mobility as part of talent management process.
So, Cathy, I think you've been based in Japan quite a few years now,
Yes.
moving back from the US. But can you give us an idea of some of the trends you're seeing in your sort of area of work?
Absolutely. I think when you're looking at from a HR perspective, one of the things that we do notice is that within Asia Pacific, this is one of the fastest growth region. Talent management is actually one of the very key element, in terms of organization are facing with. I think in just about every single organization we talk to, there's always a lot of concerns about where do I find the talent, and how do I make sure that I attract and retain those talents on an ongoing basis. So linking with talent management, organization now are kind of looking at more innovative approaches, but also recognizing that diversity and inclusion, D&I, as we talked before, is really one of the very key aspects as part of the overall talent management process.
Diversity, that's something. It's kind of like a buzzword. I hear a lot with that. Can you touch a bit more on?
Well, I would say that even more than just a buzzword. I think if organization that looking at from a business growth, I see that as a business imperative. This is something that organization, in order to make sure that you maximize your human capital, you need to really expand, you really need to embrace the concept of D&I, diversity and inclusion. We've seen, I think Japan would be one good example, is that not only are you looking at gender is a big issue where, you have an aging population. You also have a large untapped pool of women, very educated. You're also talking about embracing and bringing changes from non-Japanese,
Right.
foreigners coming into
Right.
to facilitate kind of exchange of information and knowledge transfer.
Mm.
So those are the elements that's actually absolutely critical for a market, like Japan. And we've seen other countries are trying to do the same thing.
Right.
So it's not only unique to Japan. We've seen Singapore government, talking about wanting to encourage more local people to immigrate or to move to Singapore in order to make sure that you have the right pool of talent,
Right.
but also to facilitate and exchange a lot of the ideas.
Because I've noticed with a lot of our clients,
Yeah.
the actual when they look at their global sales,
Right.
overseas sales outside of Japan
Yeah.
actually kind of grow bigger than the kind of domestic sales.
Yes.
And it's kind of like a wake-up call, and they
Yeah.
start to really.
Well,
think,
one of the things that we do a lot with a lot of our clients here, a lot of our clients now also are Japanese company, and we've seen a tremendous change.
Right.
Most of Japanese, particularly when addressing talent mobility, I think up until maybe 4 or 5 years ago, a lot of the companies are very much, the focus is sending Japanese expat overseas
Right.
for knowledge, for development, for business reason. We're now seeing companies recognizing that the talent is not only the Japanese expat, but the non-Japanese expat. So we're actually seeing a new trend, it's called impatriates. So foreigners that are actually coming into Japan, hiring by Japanese companies, working in Japan, but also representing the Japanese company, working in other markets.
Interesting.
And so a lot of these are now becoming more and more relevant. We have more clients, come to us and saying, we need to recognize this new diverse pool of talents, and how do we address those? How do we come up with the right policy to attract us? And we've seen this consistent trends among particularly what we call Asian multinational companies. Companies that are beginning to be more global, that are now not your normal foreign multinational, but the new up-and-coming Asian multinational companies.
I think maybe GLOBIS would be one of those.
Absolutely,
specific ones.
absolutely. Yeah, I think GLOBIS would be a very good example.
Maybe I should put in for a transfer to Vietnam or something.
Yeah.
Okay. And Cathy, I think you also mentioned you lived in the UK for a
I
short
did,
for a few
yes.
years. Yeah.
I, transfer after I
Right.
got married, transferred to the UK for a fast-moving consumer goods company, a very large one, and was responsible for Western and Eastern Europe
Okay.
in terms of HR programs.
It was one of the drinks companies, not Coca-Cola, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
The other one.
Yeah.
Okay. And you've lived and worked in so many different countries.
Yeah.
Did anything surprise you about like the way of life or the way of doing business, or maybe
Yeah.
you didn't get culture shock because you're
Yeah.
so much experience,
Yeah.
but things that just surprised
Yeah.
you. I don't know.
Always. I think because every market is very different. I think what is, I think you always, and particularly you are in a professional environment, in addition to the normal day-to-day life, there's always elements that take you by surprise, not as much a shock, and there's always elements that you find challenging, and difficult sometimes to adjust. I think for me, maybe the transition is a little bit shorter, having
Right.
because I don't have a choice,
Okay.
and so when you move to a country, you really either adapt to it, or you will be very unhappy and not be able to perform well. And so these are the kind of things that, just basically force you in some way to, for the lack of a better word, to really adapt as quickly as possible.
Can you think of some examples? I mean, going from Vietnam to maybe Europe or London or America and now
yeah.
Japan. I mean, can you think of some examples?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in the U.S., and this we'll talk a lot about, let's talk about a decision-making process. And often it can be made very quickly, something that is basically, you can come up with a group, but then it doesn't necessarily have to wait for a group decision to have decision made. You move to Vietnam, it's not the same, at the same level, But the Vietnam demographic, you have people that are very young, so very eager
Right.
to learn new things, and actually sometimes too fast,
Right.
are trying to absorb and then be able to kind of adapt it and take those information and make the decision quickly. And then you transition to Japan, which is much more mature, well-developed market. And there's a very steep in tradition. And so I think when you come here, making process takes a quite a long time.
Right.
And you have to get, consensus from everybody. And then very much, the process itself has to be thoroughly vetted. And so changes takes a long time in Japan.
Right.
I think I'm beginning to see some changes, but at the same time, I think it's always granted that in order to get a decision made here, it takes a longer time
Right.
to transition or to move into make a final decision.
I just want to touch on one more sort of HR issue because we're so lucky to have like an expert with us. So
I'm definitely not an expert, more like a practitioner.
Okay,
Yeah.
practitioner. Okay,
Yeah.
but I think labor law in Japan is kind of it's very very sort of detailed and quite sort of rigorous, and I think employees are quite well protected.
Yeah.
Does that impact on the type of advice that you would give to your clients, or?
Yeah, I would say that not only Japan. I think you see similar in regulation, statutory requirement in all organization. I think U.S., U.K., Europe are also very well developed, and employees in general are always very well protected.
Right.
So much more defined, much more transparent. And I think when you go to other countries, and same thing in Asia Pacific, Singapore, the same thing as well. I think where you've seen there's some differences were probably in emerging market like Vietnam, China. I think they are where they still go through a transition. So the law itself, are continue to be fine tuning,
Right.
and so there may be certain areas that are not as well defined.
Right.
Or well regulated,
Right.
and that also creates some confusion, some concern among clients. So we do have to recognize
Right.
the degree of maturity in each of the market.
Thank you,
Yeah.
great. Okay, moving on a bit.
Yep.
Something you love, something you hate about Japan.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Maybe
Something
hate's a strong word,
Yeah.
but something you love.
Something I love. Well, this is our second time being in Japan,
Right.
and I have to admit the first time was a bit tough because. And the first time was about 10 years ago. And I was the only, I would say I was the only non-Japanese, but almost. Basically, at that time, there was even fewer, foreigners working in Japan. And I didn't speak Japanese as well either. And being a woman was also make it even tougher. The fact that I'm Asian, that makes it even tougher. So I think, for me, coming back, I do see an improvement. I do see more women entering the workforce, particularly in a professional environment. So from that standpoint, this time the assignment, it's definitely much more enjoyable.
I see.
Because of the professional environment. I think from a personal day-to-day life, we love Japan. This is a very, we have 2 children living here, going to school, very safe, very clean. People are always very courteous, very supportive in general.
Right.
So those things definitely, we truly enjoy living here, the convenience and everything.
Right.
Yeah. And we always joke about, in Japan, when the train, say, it comes at 2:05, it comes exactly at 2:05. If of anything, it's probably come at 2:04.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen elsewhere. And
Right.
so very reliable, and everything you have, that it's quality.
Right.
Things that I don't enjoy, well, first of all, it's a very expensive place to live, so it's always a challenge. The other part is I think this is a country that still, to some extent, very entrenched in tradition. And I think, being Asian, I can understand that element. But I'm also anxious to see it maybe to be a little bit more flexible in adapting new idea, in recognizing it, and also embracing change it from outside as well.
Right.
I think in some way, sometimes it can be a bit inflexible and
Right.
resistant,
Right.
to new ideas from outside. And I think in moving in that direction,
Right.
it really can limits the country to be able to progress and to be more innovative.
Hmm. You mentioned there, the Asian perspective of Japan, the Asian view of Japan kind of thing. How is, I could speak about how England, I'm from
Right,
England, right? So
right.
how England's viewed from kind of continental
Yeah,
Europe,
yeah.
right? How would you say the kind of Asian people view Japan as this sort of island on the edge?
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know, what?
It's interesting because and I can talk more from my personal viewpoint, but
Right.
also just from comments that I hear.
Right.
Well, I think in general, the Asian viewpoint is, the people in general is hardworking, very honest, very resilient,
Right.
very dedicated.
Mm.
I think as a country,
Mm.
Japan, even for Asian, always kind of be regarded as a little bit unique, in terms of the culture and the very strong kind of identity, national identity.
Right.
I think when you're looking at compared to Vietnam, other country, Singapore, where you have so many people from different nationality,
Right.
foreigners are easily accepted. Japan is almost a little bit different. I think from a business standpoint, often we have clients tend to treat Japan market as a kind of independent market outside of Asia. And it does happen to, in terms of the recognition
Right.
that Japan is it's a large market,
Right.
but it's very unique in its
Yeah.
own sense.
Yeah. On that theme, looking forward, I know Japan, one of the things in Japan is the aging population
Right.
and actually shrinking population. So how would you see Japan sort of 5, 10, 20 years off into the future?
I think they're a good prospect on I think looking maybe 10, 20 years is too far ahead. No one can predict it.
Right.
But I think within the next 5 years, one of the things we do see is that Japanese company, in order to prosper, is now expanding, going outside of Japan, domestic.
Right.
I think that notion of go east, young man, is very much in order for Japan to continue to prosper, it has to look beyond the domestic market.
Right.
And so from what we're hearing so far, lot more and more companies in Japan are recognizing that and are making some aggressive acquisitions in other emerging markets, Southeast Asia, Africa, and so on. So I think the prospect is good from that standpoint. The other hand is really, that could be a serious issue, is how do you continue to expand from a business but having the necessary talent? And that's a larger issue that's looming. Because as we mentioned about aging population,
Right.
labor pools getting shrinking more and more. And among Asian country, if I remember correctly, Japan is the oldest country in terms of it. And so that will have a tremendous impact, on Japanese company and also as a country to continue to grow and prosper, over the next 5 to 10 years.
So you're making maybe more use of the kind of women population.
Yeah,
and
making
also,
use of the diverse talent
Right,
that you have,
right.
existing, within existing country, but also bringing diverse talent from outside as well.
Okay, I know a lot of acquisitions have been taking place,
Yeah.
across, especially with the yen having been so strong for a long
Exactly,
time.
exactly.
And I think you mentioned you're involved in post-M&A integration as well.
Yeah, well, I'm
what-
not, we have a group that
Right.
dedicate to M&A, and I do get involved in terms of looking at different aspects with the M&A that has to do with talent issue. So yes, there's been lots of our clients do merger and acquisition activities. Most of them is outside of Japan,
Right.
whether it's in North America and U.S., but also in Southeast Asia, and also to some extent in new market like Middle East and Africa as well.
Are there? Could you touch on some of the issues Japanese companies have once they acquire, a large,
foreign companies,
and then
Culture, be able
Okay.
to, I think there's two issues. One is understanding the foreign culture and vice versa for the foreigner to understand the Japanese culture.
Right.
That's always a barrier, in terms of, we hear that constantly coming from our clients
Right.
doing acquisitions. And the second thing is probably to some degree language. English language is still a challenge. And, so we've seen more companies now recognizing it and trying to increase the English proficiency. Unfortunately, because it's a business language, so it's
Right.
expected. So I
Right.
think those two are some of the issues that we continue to hear from our clients. Culture adaptability,
Right.
recognition and understanding.
I mean, I imagine one of the dangers of being acquired by a Japanese company is all the kind of really top talent. They're going to be the first people to leave if things kind of don't go well.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, for one of the things that we do see, Japanese clients, multinational, are getting better in
Okay.
recognizing these issues and making sure that, when you go into an acquisition, recognizing the top talent are very critical for the business. So a lot of our clients really make conscious effort to retain, the top talents. I think what's important is sustainability, is
Right.
how sustainable, the program, whatever you put in place, how effective are they in order to make sure that the talent stay with you for the organization over the long term. Particularly, if the individual are not considered as coming from headquarters. I think those are the kind of very strong key messages that need to be
Right.
focused on.
Right.
Yeah.
Any tips you could give? Some of our viewers, maybe they're watching, thinking of moving to Japan, or
Yeah.
maybe coming to study in Japan.
Yeah.
And so on. Any tips you could give about how to get on with Japanese people?
How to get on with Japanese people? Be patient. I think, I think recognizing that sometime the process, the reason why it takes some time, the decision-making process takes time because it's important to get consensus so that when you do implementation, when a decision is made, it will go smoothly.
Right.
And so, patient, that's the part where I'm learning every day. It is a virtue. It's something that you need to really understand it. And the second thing is, to embrace the culture. I think the ability, I would definitely recommend trying to at least learn the language
Right.
to the best ability that you can. Trying to at least be able to converse, even just to, share some small chat, having some conversation
Right.
in local language will makes it much easier and also give you a better appreciation of the
Right.
culture.
Thank
Yeah.
you. And from the other way around, tips for Japanese people how to get on with.
How to get on with. I think in general, a lot of our friends, Japanese colleagues and clients that we work with have traveled quite a bit, in terms of going to other countries, very international, very global. The only thing I would say is that when people going out, there's tend to be a tendency to even eat food that are Japanese food, even when you go to Italy, to Vietnam,
Right.
and very much trying to stick with the group.
Right.
So I think my recommendation would be more adventurous.
Right.
It's fine to be, to stick with the things that you're comfortable from your home country,
Right.
but it's also good to kind of be a little bit more adventurous,
Right.
explore,
Right.
try out different new things, and I think that would give you, a more diverse in terms of experience.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
And you mentioned about embracing Japan, the
Right.
culture here
Yeah.
as a kind of as some advice for foreigners living here. In that, along those lines, are there any sort of Japanese figures, cultural figures, or historical figures that you admire? Or that
When I read this question,
Yeah.
and I always wonder, and I say, trying to think, and I, come down to saying there's not probably an individual, just one individual, that great of mine. But I think I would have to admit that what I've seen, the most recent experience last year, what happened in Tohoku, the earthquake, when I saw, how the people responded,
Right.
and facing with the crisis, with that kind of situation, how strong, resilient the people, and yet at the same time, a lot of unselfish act, facing with those kind of environment. For me, it's probably stand out as the most admirable things
Wow.
ever. So it's not just one person, but it's the collective group of
Right.
people that I've seen. And those kind of action, to be very honest, when you talk to foreigners, to our friends in the state or elsewhere, all of us come back, and that's probably the image that sticks the most,
Right.
is it's just amazing,
Yeah.
in terms of how people come together as a group.
Yeah.
Because we keep saying, if it's happened elsewhere, we wouldn't expect that kind of reaction.
Right.
So I think for those, the kind of things that come out to me is probably one of the most admirable
Oh, that's
things that I've
interesting. Yeah.
seen.
Were you actually in Japan?
I was in Japan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where were you, or what?
Well, I was. It's interesting because when it happened, we were in Philippines for our Asia Pacific regional meeting.
I see.
And that Friday when it happened, and we were supposed to come back the following day, Saturday. And when we heard about this, all of this happening, so we managed to come back. A number of us from Taiwan, Japan, was in Philippines, so we came back together on the Sunday. It was quite an experience. I was here at least for the first 2-3 weeks, and then was evacuated back to the U.S. for
Oh, is
about a
that
month,
right?
and then came back again after that. It was just a tremendous experience,
Mm.
in terms of what happened here in Japan.
I see. And that decision was made in New York then?
The decision was made more from the U.S. Embassy because
I
we
see.
link, because of my husband
I see.
being a U.S. diplomat. So
I
that's
see.
how it happened.
I see. Okay. Thank you. Okay. For someone, Cathy, usually when I ask this question, I mention 2 countries, but with your background,
Right.
if you were to combine the strengths from, say, the USA, Vietnam, the UK,
Yeah.
Japan, and whichever other country you want to add, to make a sort of superpower, what would you
Wow.
pick and choose from which country?
It's like a melting pot, right? It's just a melting pot of pick only the best of each of these countries. That's a tough question, but I would probably say U.S. would be creativity, innovation, the UK diversity, in terms of be able to accepting. I think Vietnam would be this kind of energy, almost like the hunger to learn, because the people are young, they
Right.
always just dying. They want to learn new things every day. And from Japan, the dedication, the discipline, and the resiliency in terms of. So to pull all of that together, you would have a perfect, in terms of model to use all the way across.
And what a company if you could develop that sort of corporate
Yeah,
culture and
exactly.
have those types of
Right.
Fantastic. Let me ask this as well. In terms of like what you're passionate about, I mean, what keeps you fired up, and what do you love about your job, or what are you passionate about? Yeah.
And this is something I ask myself every day, particularly, because as a human being working in a professional environment, there's some up and down moments.
Right.
And sometimes when I think about and I see what really drives me and really push me is when I see actually having to see the competition. Because when I see this and I think, okay, competition is actually very good, because it's kind of like a little fuel to the, just to the fire, where it's kind of push you in saying you need to compete and you need to come up with new idea, be more innovative, to really, and making sure that you come up with the right solution to meet the market and the client's demand. And so for me, changes, competition, change and innovation are the things that I find it very exciting. And that's really pushed me trying to come up with new idea. What are some of the better ways that we can do, in order to improve what we're doing right now.
Interesting.
Complacency for me is probably, I can say it's like the death
Right.
of everything. Is sometimes when there's nothing worse than having the capability and the idea, but being complacent, not
Right.
taking, not embracing, and really looking at way of changing. For me, that's something that I don't want to put myself be in that position.
So, like, competition kind of brings out the best in you. It kind of pushes
Exactly,
you on.
yeah. And I'm looking at more from healthy competition,
Right.
not cutthroat, but more really trying to think of how better, how can I best those ideas, come up with something innovative. For me, those things really are exciting, in order to be able to come up with those.
Interesting. Thank you so much. Very last question.
Sure.
Final message for our viewers, and if you want to say something in Vietnamese at the end.
I don't know about say something in Vietnamese with saying that just like in Japan we always say the gambaru, to and in Chinese we say cha yo, to hang in there. Vietnamese is we say cố gắng, meaning always try the best, to stay in there and really to hang in there, put your heart into the process. So that's how I would want to end up with my final message.
Wonderful. Cathy Loose, thank you so much. Been great
You're
talking
welcome.
to you. Really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Thank you. Very, very interesting talking to Cathy there. So very delighted that she spared the time for us. And I hope you enjoyed the interview. I'm Adam Kassab from GLOBIS. You've been watching Inside Japan, and catch you next time. Thank you.